Well, here we are again. Another long delay between pods. What can I say? No dead air. No dead air. It was hard to get people in the. Hard enough to get people on the walks, let alone up for the pod. Plus, also, it's strange to do a pod when talking is like one of my least favourite things, and everything seems to involve drinking, and I really want to cut down on that. Drinking. This walk, we had a couple of ladies on this walk, which is rare. We've the one lady brought a dog. We had a dog as well, which has never happened before. She was worried about the dog and crowds. I said there won't be too many of us. But then I understood what she meant, because when at Westminster, this is the Westminster and Whitehall walk. When we emerged at Westminster Tube, it was crowded. So many people, so many tourists. I was there first, and as I kept looking to the entrance to see if people were coming, I kept looking at this same female, and it got a bit weird, so I had to move. There were how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of us and a dog. I think that's about right. Beamish was there. He's not here today, I'm afraid. It's just me. Baleful. The baleful one. Mr. T was there. The bionic girl was there. And another thing was there. And CJABCD was there. These names are too difficult to do on my own. So, well, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. Yeah, that was it. It was a Sunday. Started about 2 p.m. Weather was fine. Little pug, the dog was a little pug. Didn't say much. So it started from Westminster Underground Station. Head down St Margaret's Street with the Houses of Parliament on your left. Surprisingly few visitors know its official name is the Palace of Westminster, and that it is the oldest royal palace in the country. Before the palace was built during Saxon times, this part of London was a barren, desolate place full of briar bushes, and known as Thorny Island. It was an island at this time, cut off from the rest of London by tributaries of the now hidden Tyburn River, which runs south from Hampstead before emptying into the Thames near Pimlico. An isolated church dedicated to St Peter was established here perhaps as early as the 7th century AD, according to legend, after the saint appeared in a vision to some fishermen. I loved that. It really was like a time travelling in the mind for me to sit back. Can you imagine? It was just an island, and a couple of fishermen decided to stack stones to make some kind of ad hoc church thing in the mist, the water lapping and the cold, and if it was in the winter. Yeah, it was really really like that. The Anglo-Saxon King Edward the Confessor moved his court to this area in the mid-11th century, building the first royal palace here and enlarging St. Peter's into what became the Benedictine Westminster Abbey. The name Westminster itself derived from the fact the minster or church of a monastery was located to the west of the more established St. Paul's Cathedral in the city. So even in the 11th century, St. Paul's was there. The English monarchy, or a version of, the English monarchy occupied the palace until the 1500s, when after a fire, Henry VIII moved his court to the nearby Palace of Whitehall. I've just got to stop for a moment. I've got to go and collect my coffee, or make my coffee. My kettle broke. Lasted about a year. Everything's designed to break these days. There's no pride in anything. Everything's designed to, built-in obsolescence. So you have to buy a new one. So anyway, the kettle's broken. So currently I'm boiling water on my hob, and I can hear it boiling now. So I'm just going to pause. I won't bother to pause. I'll just go and make it, and I'll do the pause in the edit. Back once again is the Renegade Master. That's me. Walk westwards with I've got my coffee. Walk westwards with Big Ben to your left and Parliament Square and Westminster Abbey to your right. The current Parliament building dates largely from the mid-19th century, after a fire in 1834 destroyed almost all of the old palace complex. The fire is thought to have started when the burning of redundant wooden sticks or tallies, open brackets, used by the Exchequer for tax accounting purposes, close brackets, in a furnace situated in the palace cellars got out of control. The architect of the famous neo-Gothic design was Sir Charles Barry, 1795 to 1860, assisted by August Pugin, 1812 to 1852. At this point, I put the book down to the pug dog, because Pugin sounds like pug. So you got something to say? Didn't have anything to say. I don't really like pugs. It's not offensive though. I like greyhounds, whippets, lurchers, those kinds of dogs. Inside Parliament building. Inside is a warren of 1,200 rooms, over 2 miles of passages. The members of the Houses of Commons and a House of Lords can also relax in one of the 19 bars, a gymnasium, a hair salon, and even a miniature rifle range. So they have a rifle range in there with miniature rifles, and that sounds fun and useful, Do you know what I mean? And I wouldn't want to have a miniature rifle, self-defense, because things can get crazy. They say things are going to get crazy. China, Russia, asbestos, all the rest of it. Big Ben is the best known feature of the palace, although the name refers to the great bell inside Elizabeth Tower rather than the tower itself. So it's actually called Elizabeth Tower. Inside are 5 bells, of which Big Ben, officially the Great Bell of Westminster, is the biggest at over 13 tons, ringing the note of E every hour. Every bell starts with an E. The original Great Bell cracked during testing, and Big Ben was cast as a replacement at the Whitechapel Bell Foundry on Whitechapel Road in 1858. When it was transported from Whitechapel to Westminster, huge crowds turned out to see Big Ben being pulled along by 16 brightly beribboned horses. It was either named after Benjamin Hall, the then Commissioner of Works, or the 18-stone heavyweight boxer Ben Caunt, C-A-U-N-T. The tower contains a secret prison cell used for troublemakers within the palace, and the suffragette Emmeline Pankhurst was held here following a protest in the early 20th century. That would drive you mad as a hunchback. Loony as a balmy as a hunchback, with the clanging of the bells every hour. Deaf and mad. Tight security measures ensure that the visiting the palace is not easy. Yeah, he talks about getting tickets to go inside. Continue west with the palace to your left. Go west, turn left. Go west with the palace to your left. Even if you don't visit inside, remnants of the palace's Saxon and medieval past are visible to the casual visitor from the roadside. The most obvious is Westminster Hall, which overlooks Parliament Square, whose own claim to fame lies in becoming the country's first official roundabout in 1926. Wow. That's late, isn't it? The hall was built, the whole country didn't have a roundabout until 1926. Crazy. The hall was built around 1097 by William II. It is 1056 to 1100, 44 years of age. It is arguably the birthplace of English democracy, as it was the original meeting place for the King's Council, the forerunner of the present House of Lords. The hall was also the location of the first true English Parliament to include elected representatives summoned by Simon de Montfort in 1265. The magnificent oak hammer beam ceiling was added in the 1390s during the reign of Richard II. During restoration work in 1913, the authorities were struggling to find wood of sufficient quality to replace some of the rotting timbers. Sir George Cookthorpe, MP, suggested using trees from his family estate near Wadhurst in Sussex. The source of the original timber, his ancestors having had the foresight to plant new trees in anticipation of future repairs. See, this felt easy to read just now, but when you're with people and they're staring at you, you think, God, is this boring, people, you know? I mean, who cares about where the wood came from? But actually not too bad to read on your own. It's the pressure of the eyes of the little hatchlings in the nest, you know, desperate for a tasty worm. For many centuries the hall was used as a law court. Some of the most dramatic trials in British history took place here, including those of Scotland's Braveheart, William Wallace, 1305, Sir Thomas More, 1535, Queen Anne Boleyn, 1536, Guy Fawkes, 1606, and Charles I, 1649. Somebody mentioned the irony of being, for Guy Fawkes, of being, judged in the same place we were trying to blow up. Oliver Cromwell was declared Lord Protector in the Hall in 1653, although after his death his decomposing head was stuck on the roof of the hall, where it stayed for 25 years until being finally blown down. Over the following centuries, Cromwell's head passed through many hands until 1960, when it was buried at a secret location within the chapel of his old Cambridge College. Westminster Hall remained an important law court right up until the 1880s, when the Royal Courts of Justice on the Strand were opened. Peter the Great of Russia, 1672 to 1725. Do you remember him from one of the previous walks? Visited it during his stay in London, was struck by the number of lawyers visible in their wigs and gowns, causing him to remark, "Lawyers! Why, I have but two in my whole dominions, and I believe I shall hang one of them the moment I get home." Oh, sorry, that was a bit German. I thought that was funny. History can be dry. It needs pithy, memorable aphorisms and comments and things. With some history people, you get a lot of fact, but none of this sort of stuff. The palace contains a few other relics of the pre-1834 complex, most notably the late 13th century crypt under St Stephen's Hall, the Tudor cloisters, and the Jewel House. Today the House of Commons within the palace is the heart of British democracy. However, for hundreds of years the members of the Commons were shunted around between the palace and Westminster Abbey like poor relations, before eventually securing a permanent berth in the Royal Chapel of St Stephen's, which had been emptied of its priests after Henry VIII's dissolution. The Commons continued to meet in the chapel until it was destroyed in 1834. The current St Stephen's Hall is built on the same site. Brass studs on the floor mark the location of the old Speaker's chair and table of the house. It was in the old chapel that King Charles I confronted the Commons in 1642, demanding the arrest of 5 MPs for treason. The Speaker famously replied, "May it please your Majesty, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak in this place, but as the House is pleased to direct me, whose servant I am here." So he's saying that he could only do what the people of the House of Commons ask him to do, not what the King asks him to do, I think. The bitter civil war followed, which ended with Charles I's execution. We get back to that a bit later. To this day, by tradition, the monarch is not allowed to enter the Commons. I have to keep an eye on the time because I have to go out shortly. But I do want to keep this one short because I've got the podcast actually going up now, and it's limited how much you can upload. Sir Charles Barry was commissioned to construct the post-1834 Parliament complex in a Gothic design, despite his classical preferences. At this time, classical designs were associated with republicanism, as exemplified in the government buildings then being built in Washington. And so Barry commissioned Pugin, the champion of Gothic design, to provide the medieval details. It was not always a happy partnership, Pugin remarking acidly about Barry's restoration of the Great Hall. "All Grecian, sir. Tudor details on a classic body." Pugin was a workaholic, a habit that helped drive him into a mental asylum while still relatively young. I wonder which one. Bedlam? Votes in the Commons are called by the ringing of the division bell. Before modern technology such as mobile phones, many local public houses and restaurants were connected to the Commons, so their own bell could let MPs know when to head back to the House to vote. An example of such a bell can still be seen in the Red Lion Public House, situated at 48 Parliament Street, about halfway between the Palace of Westminster and Downing Street. How many important votes have been done by completely sozzled parliamentary pigs of one stripe or the other? If you die in a royal palace, you are in theory entitled to a state funeral. The implications of this means that deaths within the Palace of Westminster have traditionally been registered as taking place elsewhere, often at St Thomas Hospital nearby. Then Prime Minister Spencer Perceval was shot and killed in the lobby of the House of Commons in 1812. The only British Prime Minister to have been assassinated, he officially died, rather conveniently, as his body crossed the threshold of 10 Downing Street. So in that moment he became a very, very long man. He cast a long shadow. Follow the map west, passing the statues of Cromwell and Richard II on the left. On the right, on the other side of St Margaret Street, is the medieval Dual Tower, a rare survivor of the old palace, built in around 1365 as a stronghold for Edward III's treasure. It later housed the records of the House of Lords before becoming the Office for Weights and Measures. That was interesting. I liked that. 1365, Chaucer's sort of time. Yeah, that was very nice. That was a very nice bit. Continue into Victoria Tower Gardens, past the statue of Emmeline Pankhurst, leader of the suffragette movement. And then I made some joke about her. I can't remember what it was. You've seen reach Auguste Rodin's The Burghers of Calais. This is one of the finest pieces of public art in London. Rodin's inspiration was the siege of Calais by the English under Edward III in 1347 during the 100 Years' War. The city was forced to surrender, and the king offered to spare its inhabitants on the condition he received 6 of their most prominent citizens wearing nooses and carrying the keys to the city. The burghers walked out to meet their fate. As burghers is spelled Burghers. However, Edward's queen, Philippa of Hainault, persuaded her husband to spare them, believing their death would be a bad omen for her pregnancy. This statue was purchased in 1911 as one of the 12 casts made of the original after Rodin's death, the maximum permitted under French law. I made a joke about McDonald's or something. It wasn't great. People almost booed me. There are a few times when people almost booed my jokes, but I boo them back. You know, you're not funny. I'm funny. You're not funny. You are funny, but not funny. Ha ha. Then we had a nice stroll through the gardens, taking in one of the finest views on the Thames in London, and when we exited the gardens, some guy saw this guidebook thing, and he was like, "Oh, they're good, they are." And they had a little brief conversation. He said there was some woman up the road who had the same book. So it must have been another instance of people doing the same walk as us. I wonder if it was the same people that were doing it the previous time. Now that would have been funny, eh? Very funny. And a bit uncanny, funny and uncanny and funny, unfunny, uncanny. Walk through the gardens, taking in one of the finest views of the Thames in London, and continue along Mill Bank, named after the medieval mill that once stood by the riverbank. Since 1995, Thames House at number 11 Mill Bank has been home to MI5. Now we know. Military Intelligence Section 5. I know about MI5, MI6. What's MI1, 2, 3 and 4? Do they exist? The counterintelligence and security agency concerned with Britain's domestic security. After about 5 minutes, you reach Tate Britain on the right-hand side. I liked this bit. And this is information that I didn't know, and I've been to the Tate Britain a fair few times. Yeah. don't particularly rate it. The Tate stands on the site of one of London's most peculiar experiments, the Millbank Penitentiary. Built on 7 acres of marshland, it was for a time the largest prison in London when completed in 1821 and could hold 1,120 prisoners. The design was based on the panopticon principle developed by philosopher Jeremy Bentham, with the corridors of prison cells being connected along a 6-pointed star to a central point, which allowed the warders to sit in the middle and keep an eye on the prisoners, who had to live in almost total silence. That would suit me. I like quiet. Bentham had the contract to build the prison until his funding fell through, although he influenced the design. Many ancestors of today's Australians began their journey from here, as nearly all male and female prisoners sentenced to deportation in England passed through Millbank, so it was a mixed prison then. Was it? The prisoners would cross over from the prison onto barges moored in the Thames. Around 4,000 people a year until 1867 began their transportation this way. The prison was finally shut in 1890 and demolished 2 years later. Also, opposite the Morpeth Arms public house, you can see a stone bollard in a small garden which stood by the river steps. I don't know if we saw that. I did not, and I certainly didn't take enough photos on this walk. I was too concerned with entertaining the people again, rather than stop, take the photo, read the stuff, Yeah, I have to be a tour guide, not a mate. It's tough. A stone bollard and small which stood by the river steps. Prisoners being transported to Australia passed by here along a passageway from the prison. And he talks about how Tate is a great place to, stay, to visit. Yeah, I like the old pictures. The very old ones the most. Continue past the Tate, looking out for the Victorian Morpeth Arms. Here, the gang decided we've barely been walking. We're only at number. Everybody suddenly wanted to sit down and have a bloody drink, So we had to do that. That's on top of them having a spliff outside the Tate, which was most of them did, which I didn't approve of. Well, just because, I don't know, I don't take drugs anymore, and I feared that it would send them into a laziness. And then here we are sitting down outside of a pub already. Oh well. And booze makes me lazy, so I don't know. And moody sometimes. Continue past the Tate, looking out for the Victorian Morpeth Arms public house, built originally for the prison's warders. It contains the remnants of a tunnel and cellar said to have been part of the prison and used to take prisoners to the Thames. The cellar is not generally open to the public. However, if you're interested, it's worth asking someone in the pub to let you have a look. I asked them who went in to do that. Nobody did. Be careful if you do. It's said that a prisoner died in a tunnel and that his ghost still haunts the pub. In any event, this is another good stop for a break. Particularly upstairs from a great view to the Thames. We didn't go up there, we sat outside. The room's small collection of photographs of famous spies is appropriate given the modern MI6 building. Dear, didn't see that. Clearly visible on the other side of the river. MI6, the secret intelligence service, looks after Britain's foreign security interests. And the construction of this building aroused huge controversy in late 1990s because of the cost, estimated at around 200 million, and its less than subtle design. Follow the map down Ponsonby Place and then up John Islip Street with its magnificent avenue of plane trees. These were great. I should have taken a photo of these. Passing alongside the rear of the Tate. I've been down there so many times and I have not been down the rear of the Tate. I think it was around here that walking along here that the Anna and another thing and the pug had to leave. Had enough. No, the dog walking should take the dog back to its owner. Continue along a few minutes, crossing Horseferry Road until you reach Smith Square Road. It was a few minutes. I was panicking that we were going the wrong way in my head. We can't show the panic to the people. The eastern side of Horseferry Road is where an ancient horse ferry once operated, taking passengers between Thorney Island and Lambeth and earning revenue for the Archbishop of Canterbury, who occupied Lambeth Palace. Then we found ourselves in Smith Square. Smith Square was laid out in the 1720s and is dominated by St John's Smith Square, one of London's finest small concert venues. The building, designed by Thomas Archer, started life as the Church of St John the Evangelist and is regarded as one of the finest examples of English Baroque architecture in London. It was a very strange sight. It became known as the Queen Anne's footstool on account of the legend that when asked about her preference for the church's design, the Queen kicked over her footstool with the legs facing upwards like the four towers of the church, crying, "Like that!" I like that story. That made us laugh. The church opened in 1728, but surprisingly its design was never very popular, Dickens describing it in Our Mutual Friend as a very hideous church, resembling some petrified monster. However, most regard it, you should say these days, as an elegant piece of Rome in the heart of Westminster. You may notice its slightly slanted appearance, the result of having its foundations on marshy ground. The north side of the square contains some of the finest Georgian houses in London. That sentence seems to appear in like every walk. Dating from the early 18th century, number 32 on the square was until very recently the headquarters of the Conservative Party. Continue along North Street, dating from the 1720s. Didn't we come across that on the headquarters of the Conservative Party on the last walk? Continue along Lord North Street, dating from the 1720s, and look out on the left-hand side near number 8 for an extremely rare reminder of the Blitz in London. A faded sign reads, "Public shelters in vaults under pavements in this street." Well, that was on the one side, and on the other one there was another sign. And the shelters are still hidden underneath, having been blocked up after World War II. Open up underground London. The disgraced Tory minister Jonathan Aitken used to live here before being jailed for perjury in 1999. And Prime Minister Harold Wilson used to live at number 5 in the mid-1970s. Continue up Cowley Street, the Liberal Democrat headquarters are at number 4, and into Barton Street. Along with Lord North Street, these quiet streets with their elegant Georgian townhouses are where the wealthier politicians choose to live, and are a far cry from the tourist-dominated streets around Westminster Palace. The locale was evidently hidden enough to attract the famously reclusive T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, 1888 to 1935. He lived in the attic at number 14 and wrote much of the 7 Pillars of Wisdom whilst living here. He had to get up to the attic in his old age. Well, he didn't reach old age, did he? No. Killed on a motorbike accident. Damn, he would have been good in the Second World War to have him around. Follow the map into Great College Street and then right through the gates into the wide expanse of Dean's Yard. We couldn't do this, we had to walk around. It was a Sunday, the gates were shut. Dean's Yard, part of Westminster Abbey. The yard is also home to 2 other historic British institutions, Westminster School and the headquarters of the Church of England. As with Parliament, the Abbey is covered extensively in the main tourist guides. However, there are some features which are often overlooked by many tourists, and you can reach these by following the signs for the cloisters on the other side of the yard. We didn't go in, so I'm going to skip all of that, the reading about the inside. Leave the abbey and walk around to see the 900-year-old church of St Margaret's, which is sited discreetly between the abbey and the palace. It was founded when the Benedictine monks of the abbey decided they no longer wished to share their services with the local inhabitants of Westminster, and so built a separate church for the parish. La-di-da. The current structure dates largely from the late 15th century, and past parishioners include poet John Milton, married here, and pioneering printer William Caxton, buried here. Sir Walter Raleigh, 1552 to 1618, was buried under the altar here after being executed in Old Palace Yard, opposite the Jewel House. That reminds me, I need to find out the heart of that lady, the Queen, other Queen. Others executed in the yard include Guy Fawkes and 3 others involved in the famous gunpowder plot to blow up the Commons, all of whom were hung, drawn and quartered in the yard in 1606. Being the parish church of the House of Commons, St Margaret's hosts many politicians' weddings, and Samuel Pepys and Winston Churchill were both married here, not to each other. The church also features a stained glass window commemorating the marriage of Prince Arthur, Henry VIII's brother, to Catherine of Aragon, later wife to Henry as well. Didn't know that. The churchyard contains a Roman boundary stone embedded in the ground. Beside the church is broad sanctuary, named after the sanctuary that operated here in medieval times, and where criminals could live in relative safety under the protection of the church, provided their crimes were not treasonable or heretical. Follow the map up Storey's Gate, pausing beside Methodist Central Hall, which opened in 1912 and can accommodate over 2,000 people. In 1946, it was the venue for the inaugural General Assembly of the United Nations. The UN soon moved to New York, and its origins in London are largely forgotten. The first meeting for the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, C&D, also took place here in 1958, with the speakers including Bertrand Russell and J.R. Hartley. I busted out a J.R. Hartley joke here. Really, it's J.B. Priestley, but I did a J.R. Hartley joke which made all of us of a certain age laugh. And CJABCD, he didn't get it because he was too young. But J.R. Hartley, just Google J.R. Hartley on YouTube and you'll see. So it's actually J.B. Priestley. The construction of the hall was bankrolled by the 20th Century Fund, which was set up to commemorate the 100th anniversary of John Wesley's death. In the main lobby you can ask to see 50 vast volumes containing the signatures of the 1 million donors who each contributed 1 guinea. Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber's father was the director of music and an organist at the hall for many years, and the younger composer chose the hall for the premiere of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat in 1968. Sorry, I'm rubbing my forehead and all my dry skin is falling off. I don't know what all this dry skin's about. I hate it, and then it becomes an obsession to rub the forehead and all this grey, dry, dead skin fall off. I'm sorry, dear listener. Maybe I just don't drink enough water. Although I drink enough coffee, drink loads of that, and that's made of water. If you need a break, there is a nice cafe on the lower ground floor. The basement was England's largest World War II air raid shelter with a capacity for 2,000 people. Now this is where the bionic lady left us. She moans. She does moan. She's a bit of a moaner, that one. She's very welcome on the tours, but she moans about the length of the walk. But you get your money's worth with me. So, continue up Storey's Great Gate, leading you into the heart of HM government, where the key ministries are based. Cross over Great St George Street into Horse Guards Road, which runs along St James's Park. This inspired a memory, and when we were young, we moved to a very rural place from London to a countryside, and my mother said to me and my brother that we should try to earn money, and a good idea would be to go out and collect horse manure and then sell it to people as fertilizer for their gardens. Only one old lady bought any off of us, and so the next time she was the first person we went to and sold it to her again. The fourth weekend that we went round there with bags of dung, she answered the door. She just said quite tersely, "Please stop coming round here." And that was the end of that. Makes me laugh. She'll be dead now. Jeez. The Treasury is housed in the building on the right-hand side, and on the corner with King Charles Street is the entrance to the Cabinet War Rooms. The War Rooms served as the underground headquarters of Winston Churchill and his cabinet during World War II, protecting them from the heavy air raids suffered by London. They contain the secure telephone used by Churchill to discuss secret wartime matters with President Roosevelt, and also the Churchill Museum. Soon after the war, the rooms were shut and hidden from public view for 40 years, until being taken over by the Imperial War Museum in 1984. Some believe the underground complex extends far beyond what can be seen by the public, with secret tunnels connecting the rooms to 10 Downing Street and possibly far beyond. Far beyond to where? Middle Earth? The centre of the Earth? Continue along King Charles Street with the Foreign Office on your left. Ahead is Parliament Street, where you head north past Sir Edward Lutyens' cenotaph monument to the dead of both world wars. Shortly on the left is Downing Street, famous as the official home of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I read all this out in front of these people, and had a huge crowd at this moment. Everybody was listening in, and they said thank you at the end, so a couple of them did. What is less well known that it is named after the unscrupulous 17th century statesman Sir George Downing, 1623 to 1684, who first developed the street. Downing spent much of his childhood in Salem, Massachusetts, and was the second graduate of the now famous Harvard University. Now, if you'd read our Southwark Walk, you'd know all about Harvard University. Regarded as a skilled yet untrustworthy diplomat, his behaviour resulted in his name becoming American slang for a man who betrays another's trust. And what's that bit of slang then? I don't understand. I've never heard that bit of slang. Downing Street retains 4 of the original houses that its founder built here after buying the land in 1680. Number 10 began its association with the office of Prime Minister when George II offered the house to Sir Robert Walpole in 1732, and it became, and technically remains, the office of the First Lord of the Treasury. It was joined to a much bigger house at the rear, and the small frontage belies the 160 rooms that lie within. Blimey. You wouldn't get that from when you see it on the telly. Number 14 was the scene of the only meeting between Lord Nelson and the Duke of Wellington, a purely coincidental encounter that took place in the waiting room of the Exchequer. Just north of Downing Street at number 70 is found the Cabinet Office, which dates from the mid-19th century and is situated on part of the former Palace of Whitehall. It was on this site that the young Henry VIII carried out his numerous sporting activities such as tennis, bowling, cockfighting and jousting. The remains of his tennis courts are visible inside, and the building also contains a cockpit gallery named after the site of Henry's cockfighting pit. I've seen other places called Cockpit Theatre. That must be why they're called that. Okay. The medieval building was later converted into a private residence by Charles II and was first used as a cabinet office in around 1720. Given its role as a government building, it is not currently open to the public. The Palace of Whitehall was the main royal residence in central London after the Henry VIII moved out of Westminster Palace in the early 16th century. Whitehall was the largest palace of its kind in Europe until its destruction by fire in 1698. At its peak, it covered 23 acres and contained over 1,500 rooms. It was originally founded as York Palace by the Archbishop of York in the 13th century and was later home to Cardinal Wolsey. Henry VIII took over the palace, and it is here that he married Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour, where both he and Charles II died, and the setting for the first performance of Shakespeare's The Tempest in 1611. After its destruction, there were plans for the palace to be rebuilt by Sir Christopher Wren, but William III decided to live elsewhere, and the plan was never realised. Continue north past the elegant 18th century Dover House on the left, where the Scotland office is based, and turn into Horse Guards, the official entrance into Whitehall. Head past the guards and into the vast open space of Horse Guards Parade. Best known today is the location of the annual Trooping of the Colour ceremony. In the 16th century, Henry VIII used to practice his jousting in the tilt yards that once stood here. Yes, it was jousting, it was called tilting. Surrounded by the Palace of Whitehall complex. The Horse Guards were originally based here to guard the entrance to the Palace of Whitehall, and the buildings later became the headquarters of the British Army. However, today the site only serves a ceremonial function. If you have time, visit the Household Cavalry Museum, a living museum in the heart of the Horse Guards, where visitors can see troopers working with their horses. One of my uncles was one of those. Those are 18th century stables. On the far right, looking north, you can see the odd-shaped brick building covered in ivy known as the Citadel. And I always wondered about this building, a bomb-proof building erected during World War II, and is said to still be used as communications centre by Navy intelligence. This inspired in us talk of the Rolling Stones album, Same Planet Majesty's Request, because it's got a song called Citadel on that. And we wondered if it was a song about this place. Head back onto Whitehall and cross over to the Banqueting House, completed in 1622 and designed by Inigo Jones for James I. It is the only surviving part of the Palace of Whitehall. It was from a window on the first floor of this building that Charles I, remember, walked out onto a scaffold to be beheaded on January the 30th. 1649. We sat down in later at a pub looking back on that, and I could really see all the crowds and him walking out. It's supposed to be very calm. I could see it all in my mind. Inside the ceiling, paintings by Sir Peter Paul Rubens are the finest feature. The Banqueting House's Italianate Renaissance style was regarded as highly innovative in Jacobean England, and even today its beautifully proportioned exterior does not seem out of place beside the modern buildings nearby. The Ministry of Defence building to the south of the Banqueting House contains Henry VIII's wine cellar. This hidden undercroft originally belonged to Cardinal Wolsey and was built around 1515. It contains a Tudor brick vaulted roof, 70 feet long and 30 feet wide. In 1949, the cellars were skillfully relocated when the MOD building was being constructed. It's now closed to the public. The fire that destroyed Whitehall Palace also destroyed Michelangelo's sculpture of Cupid, brought by the monarchy along with the rest of the Gonzaga collection in the 17th century. Michelangelo made it in 1496 and sold it to an Italian cardinal as an ancient Greek statue. His deception was uncovered and he was lucky to survive the scandal. That's interesting. Wish we could see it. But it is gone. Head north and turn up Great Scotland Yard, originally part of the precincts of the Palace of Whitehall. Its name may be derived from the tradition that the kings of Scotland and their courtiers stayed in this area. Sir Robert Peel founded the Metropolitan Police here in 1829, and the force became known as Scotland Yard. The Met moved out in the late 19th century, but the current headquarters of the force is still called New Scotland Yard. Sorry, I've got a cough. It's because I'm leaning into my throat. Continue along until you reach Northumberland Avenue, where the walk ends. You can either turn left to reach Trafalgar Square, with Charing Cross train station underground on the eastern side, or turn right to reach Embankment Tube. We didn't do either of those. We stopped at this pub and talked about the walk. There was only 3 of us left by now. Mr. T left at this point. And we had a nice drink on a Sunday and talked about the walk.